The infamous Briley Brothers. As I prepared this story, I went down many twists and turns of emotions. I found myself often bewildered, sad, and even angry. To me, this story seemed to give us a glimpse of the social issues of this time frame in history, how far the use of mental health care has come, or even how much people tend to trust mental health care and doctors these days. I often thought if only their parents were able or even comfortable helping these boys. At the time, mental health conditions were not as understood as they are today. So I wondered if, with different circumstances and under proper treatment, would these boys have experienced the life that they did? For that, we will never know. Born Linwood Earl, James Durrell, and Anthony Ray, the infamous Briley Brothers and their string of horrific crimes sent shockwaves through the Richmond, Virginia area in 1979. These crimes are almost legendary in nature, with chilling plot twists and daring escapes. The story still brings horror to the survivors and their families to this day. Now, surprisingly, the family was believed to be quite a solid household, with two respectable working parents who seemed to raise the children quite well on the northeast side of Richmond, Virginia, in the Highland Park neighborhood. Their father, James, worked at a concrete factory, while their mother, Bertha, was employed at Virginia Union University in food services. Their eldest son, Edward Jerome, left the home to live with relatives in North Carolina in his early teen years. It is unclear why that is. But neighbors often regarded Linwood and James, as well as their younger brother Anthony, as well-rounded kids who often helped neighbors with mowing their lawns, fixing their cars, and other errands they saw their neighbors in need of. Yet, inside their home at 3117 North Avenue, a dark and bizarre world existed. Although there has never been proof that has come forward of abuse from the boy's father, it is well known that he is the only man that the boys had any respect for. They feared their father at one time, seemingly, until the boys became teenagers. Then, they began to collect multiple deadly pets such as piranhas, boa constrictors, vicious dogs, and tarantulas. Their mother, Bertha, left James and moved away to another unknown location. This is believed to be because of the boys' odd and unusual behavior. It's even said that their father, James Sr., was so alarmed by his own son's behavior that he would padlock the bedroom door inside at night. Linwood's violent spree began back in 1971 at the precious age of 16. Neighbor Orlean Christian, an elderly and quite feisty woman known in the neighborhood for her brashness as well as her heart condition, went to walk past her window in her home directly next door to the Brileys. She suddenly fell to the floor and was pronounced dead soon after. The coroner noticed after a second examination a small hole just under the armpit and ruled the death a homicide. So police began an extensive investigation. Standing at the window in her home where Miss Christian was killed, a detective used a sheet of plywood to represent her body, with a hole cut out to represent the bullet wound. He soon determined that the bullet could only have come from the Brileys' home next door. There, the murder weapon was found, and Linwood admitted to the crime with indifference, saying, "I heard she had heart problems anyway. She would have died soon." Linwood was sent off to boot camp and served a 1-year sentence for the killing. His younger brother James, or JB, followed in the same path at the age of 16. He was sentenced to time in juvenile hall for firing a weapon at a police officer while being pursued. Their first attack occurred in March of 1979, which led to a spree of attacks from the three brothers and their younger neighbor, Duncan Meekins, who looked up to the brothers. Although there is not much information these days on their accomplice Meekins, it is well known that Meekins would later turn state evidence against the brothers and would be sent out of state to a prison to serve time and be given a new identification. On March 12, 1979, Linwood knocked on the door of a Henrico County couple, William and Virginia Butcher. Claiming that he had car trouble and needed to use their telephone, Linwood eventually forced his way into their home. He held the couple at gunpoint and waved Anthony, James, and Duncan inside. Duncan was ordered to tie up the couple while the rest of the gang robbed the house, dousing each room with kerosene after they plundered it of all of its valuables. As they were leaving, they lit a match and set the fuel on fire. The group hurriedly packed their stolen loot, a television, a CB radio, a .32 caliber pistol, and jewelry into their trunk and drove out of the area. William Butcher managed to free himself and his wife from their restraints, which Meekins later admitted he could not bring himself to tie tightly, and escaped just before the house became engulfed in flames. Now, for a while, they were widely thought to be the sole survivors of the Briley rampage, although there are rumors of sightings of the brothers. One story claimed to be a man who worked at a factory nearby one of the murders. He claimed he was on a drug binge and had been at a home in the area that offered these drugs. He stated as he was about to leave after walking out of the door when 4 men approached him and put a gun to his head, ordering him to let them inside. He stated he would do anything they wished, but that there was a 4-year-old child in there. Who he believed to be Linwood then hit him with the pistol and stated he didn't care who was in there, but to let them in. He obliged. The foursome robbed the place and left everyone unharmed. He stated he believed his co-worker had sent them there, as the sticky adhesive that the men had used on their faces spread out like war paint was an adhesive only created at the plant they worked for. That co-worker invited him to the house that day. On March 21st, Michael McDuffie, a vending machine serviceman, was assaulted, shot, and robbed in his suburban home by the Brileys. 10 days later, on March 31st, Linwood shot and killed 28-year-old Edric Alvin Clark over a drug dispute involving Meekins. On April 9th, the brothers followed 76-year-old Mary McGowan across town from her babysitting job. They followed her into her house, beat, raped, and robbed and shot her. They escaped from the residence with many of her valuables. The gang then saw 17-year-old Christopher Phillips hanging around Linwood's parked car on July 4th. Suspecting that he might have been trying to steal from the vehicle, the gang surrounded him and dragged him into a nearby backyard. There, the 3 brothers wrestled him to the ground. When Phillips began screaming for help, Linwood picked up one of the cinder blocks in the area and dropped it on his head, killing him instantly. On September 14th, disc jockey John Harvey, Johnny G. Gallagher, was performing with his band at a South Richmond nightclub. Stepping outside between a set for a break, he inadvertently came right into the hands of the Brileys. Having been looking around town for a victim all night without success, they decided to lie in wait for whoever might step outside. Gallagher was assaulted by Linwood and put into the trunk of his own Lincoln Continental. He was then driven out to the ruins of a paper mill on Mayo Island, located in the middle of the James River, where he was removed from the trunk of his car and shot dead at point-blank range in the head. $6 was taken from his wallet and divided up amongst the gang. Gallagher's body was then dumped into the river. The remains were found 2 days later. When arrested months later, Linwood was still wearing the ring from Gallagher's hand. On September 30th, 62-year-old private nurse Mary Wilfone was followed home to her Richmond apartment. The brothers surrounded her just outside the door, and Linwood beat her to death with a baseball bat. The brothers then entered her apartment and robbed it of valuables. It is also said that she may have been raped. 5 days later, on October 5th, just 2 blocks from the Briley home on 4th Avenue, 75-year-old Blanche Page and her 59-year-old boarder, Charles Garner, were murdered by the brothers. Page was bludgeoned to death, while Garner was fatally assaulted and stabbed to death with various weapons, which included a baseball bat, 5 knives, a pair of scissors, and a fork. The scissors and fork were left embedded in Garner's back. The victims of the final murders were the family of Harvey Wilkerson, a longtime friend of the brothers. On the morning of October 19th, despite having promised a judge earlier that day that he would stay out of trouble while out on parole, James led his brothers on the prowl that night for yet another victim. Upon seeing the brothers down the street, Wilkerson, who lived with his 23-year-old common-law wife, Judy Diane Barton, who was 8 months pregnant at the time, and her 5-year-old son, Harvey Wayne Barton, instinctively closed and locked his door. This action was noticed by the brothers, who then walked over to Wilkerson's front door. Terrified by their potential response if he refused to let them in, Wilkerson allowed them entry. Both of the adults in the home were overpowered, bound, and gagged with duct tape. Linwood then assaulted Judy Barlin in the kitchen, where she was raped within hearing distance of her son and her boyfriend. Meekins continued the sexual assault, after which Linwood dragged Barton back into the living room, briefly rummaging in the premises for valuables, and then left the house. The 3 remaining gang members covered their victims with sheets. James told Meekins, "You gotta get one," upon which Meekins took a pistol and fatally shot Wilkerson in the head. James then shot Barton to death. Baby Harvey followed shortly. Police happened to be in the general vicinity of the neighborhood and later saw the gang members running down the street at high speed. They did not know where the shots had been fired. The bodies were not discovered until 3 days later, but the brothers were all arrested soon afterwards. Now, during the interrogation by police, Meekins was offered a plea agreement in return for turning state evidence against the Brileys. He took the offer and provided a full detail of the crime spree. As a result, he was able to escape the death penalty and was incarcerated under an alias outside of a state prison away from the Briley brothers. Under the agreement, Meekins was given a life sentence plus 80 years, which at the time of conviction would have made him eligible for parole after serving 12 to 15 years. To this day, he has not been paroled. A single life sentence with parole eligibility was handed down to Anthony Briley, the youngest of the trio, due to his limited involvement in the killings. Because of Virginia's Triggerman statute, both James and Linwood received numerous life sentences for murders committed during the spree, but faced capital charges only in the cases where they had physically committed the actual killing of the victim. Linwood was sentenced to death for the abduction and murder of Gallagher, while James received 2 death sentences, one for each of the murders of Judy Barton and her son Harvey. Both were sent to death row at Mecklenburg Correctional Center near Boydton in early 1980. There, they were quite the disruptive duo who would use their guile and physical prowess to threaten fellow inmates and guards alike. A flourishing drug and weapons trade operated at the prison under their command. Mecklenburg Correctional Center was a state-of-the-art facility for the most dangerous prisoners. It began operations in 1976 and was to serve 360 habitual offenders. Upon its opening, the Mecklenburg Correctional Center was promised to be the most secure prison where prisoners could enter but could not leave. Little did officers know that in 1983, the Briley brothers, leading the way along with 4 additional inmates and multiple others who were slated for death, would drum up an elaborate scheme to set themselves free in what would become the largest and most infamous prison escape in U.S. history. Most stayed behind but volunteered to help with holding guards hostage, getting bars and doors unlocked, and even creating decoys for them. Along with the Brileys, the names of the 4 prisoners were Lem Tuggle, Derek Peterson, Earl Clanton, and Willie Jones. Linwood had a rumor buzzing around the prison, tipping the guards about a possible bomb being created in the prison. This was to have officers on high alert regarding a possible bombing, which would be used later to help them escape. During this time, the inmates were able to observe several weaknesses within the facility, such as security protocols that were not followed properly on a daily basis. Guards would often be dismissive of rules and were easily persuaded by inmates through bribes to allow inmates to do things within the prison that would not be normal in a regular prison, particularly on death row. These circumstances allowed for the men to easily plan the escape as well as prepare themselves and other inmates for the event. On the evening of May 31st, while coming back to the prison from their outdoor activity and under the lax eyes of the guards, Earl Clanton slipped into the guard's restroom. The restroom Clanton had hidden in gave him direct access to the control booth room, which controlled the jail cell doors. About an hour later, James Briley requested the guard in the control room to bring him a book from another prisoner, who was on the opposite side of the prison. The guard considered his request and left the control room unattended to get the book. The moment he stepped out, Clanton made his way running from the bathroom to the control room. He quickly pushed the buttons and opened all the gates to the cells, immediately causing chaos within the death row unit. As soon as the gates to the cells opened, the prisoners outnumbered the guards and they attacked them. They brutally beat and stabbed the guards with weapons they created over the past year and were able to hide successfully from the prison staff. During the early moments of the escape, both Brileys expressed strong interest in killing the officers that they had taken hostage. They went so far as to douse captive guards in lighter fluid and were prepared to toss it in a match to complete the action. Willie Lloyd Turner, another death row inmate, stepped in the way of James Briley and forbade him from doing so. Meanwhile, Alexandria, Virginia cop killer Wilbert Evans prevented Linwood Briley from raping a female nurse who had been taken hostage when en route to delivering medication to the inmates in the unit. After brutally attacking the guards at Mecklenburg, the inmates then blackmailed the guards into calling external guards and telling them a false rumor about the bomb in the prison. The external guards, under the impression that there was an active bomb after hearing these rumors for about a year, called in a bomb squad. The squad entered the building and were quickly ambushed by the men who already had complete control of the inside of the prison. The inmates then took their clothing and safety gear, including helmets, to cover their faces. They then took a television and covered it with a prison blanket to appear as if it was a bomb and placed it on a stretcher, quickly running the gurney out to the doors to the van that was waiting for them that the bomb squad had just left. They even pretended to defuse the bomb by spraying it with a fire extinguisher and then ordered all external doors and gates open so that they could drive out with it. No guards questioned this, as they were afraid for their own safety and just simply followed orders without checking with internal guards. Now, it is prison policy that guards must not leave their station jobs while on watch. However, on that day, this happened in several places, which caused this issue. Moreover, when all of the prisoners were taken inside after being outside, the guards did not do a head count, which helped Earl Clanton stay inside the locked bathroom and eventually get to the control room. Additionally, 2 complaints were made to the guard on duty for a locked bathroom, which were ignored by them. The prison policy for that suggests an immediate lockup of prisoners and then calling maintenance right away. However, that did not happen. Although a major example of complacency was showed by the prison guards, it was decided that nothing was done on purpose for their side. They had absolutely no part in conspiring and planning an escape with the Deadly Six, so they say. The guards and officers also took a lie detector test in hopes to prove that they had not aided the inmates in any way, shape, form, or fashion. And it was declared that the guards were innocent. They had been blackmailed and held as hostage by the prisoners. For their survival, they ended up doing what the prisoners asked them. Now, after their escape in the prison van, when the euphoria of it all kind of fell off and reality kind of hit them, the Deadly Six started arguing about where they would go. Not even able to reach a decision, the prisoners decided to split up and go in different ways. They abandoned the prison van in a schoolyard about 20 miles from the prison in Warrenton, North Carolina. After such a hefty escape, the police were looking all over the place for these 6 inmates, particularly in the Virginia and North Carolina area. Clanton and Peterson were caught the following afternoon on June 1st in Warrenton. A patrol car driving past a laundromat spotted the 2 men inside, one of them wearing what appeared to be a correctional officer's jacket with the badges torn off. They had stopped to eat some cheese and drink some wine from a convenience store. Tuggle, Jones, and the Briley brothers stole a pickup truck with the vanity tag PEI1 from the driveway of its owner. The Brileys were dropped off in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, north of Virginia, where a local uncle got them a job at a North Philadelphia car garage under assumed names. Tuggle and Jones planned to continue up to Canada, as they knew that Canadian authorities would not extradite fugitives facing execution. They got as far as Vermont, where Tuggle was apprehended in Stamford on June 8th after robbing a souvenir shop for $80. Jones gave himself up following a day on June 9th, just 5 miles south of the Canadian-U.S. border in Jay, Vermont. He was cold and hungry and had been bitten up by fleas, so he did try to call his mother, who did persuade him to turn himself in. Tuggle and Jones were housed at Marble Valley Correctional Facility in Rutland, pending extradition back to Virginia. The Brileys were caught last on June 19th, after the FBI traced a phone call they made to contact in New York City back to the garage where they were working. All 6 men were returned to Virginia under heavy security. Upon their return, they were held on $10 million bond each. Much of what has been revealed about the escape came from fellow inmate Dennis Stockton. Now, Stockton was also on death row for murder and originally planned to escape with them, but backed out because he actually anticipated his case would be overturned on appeal. During the escape, he wrote down everything that happened, minute by minute, in his diaries, which were later published in a Norfolk, Virginia newspaper, the Virginian Pilot. Stockton did not succeed in his appeal and was executed in 1995. All of the escaped prisoners were returned to Virginia. The Brileys continued to appeal their case with 70 different appellate judges. This time ran out for both of them. They were executed in the electric chair at the Virginia State Penitentiary. Linwood was put to death in Virginia's electric chair on October 12, 1984. James Briley was executed in the same manner on April 18th of the following year. At no point did either Briley admit responsibility or express remorse for their horrific crimes. Rather, they seemed embarrassed only that they had been captured upon making their escape from Mecklenburg. Their younger brother Anthony remains incarcerated in Virginia's correction system and comes up for parole consideration every few years. To this day, his applications for parole have been denied by the state parole board.